at some of the ways you can enhance assessing and training anything from a regular squat to a single leg squat with the motion guidance system, and ways that we can vary the intensity of the exercise while giving someone appropriate feedback as to their skill. This is going to give us a ton of really valuable information about just how their general lower chain handles closed connect chain movement. And it's super valuable to be able to assess this on one side with a client versus their unaffected side, and so that they can then see themselves where they lack control, where they lack depth in their loading, and their cue is simply following the visual light from the motion guidance laser. For our phase 1 or just regular squat assessment, I'm going to have the patient stand with their right foot, if that's the one we're assessing, in the center line of the flag. And we're going to have them fully extend their knee, turn on the laser, and get it right on the tip of their toe. So this will just be a good way to start. You'll see that as you play around with the laser, depending on where it's aimed, how far out it is from the toe, it's going to traject differently when they squat. I like to keep it close to the toe for double leg squats and far from the toe for single leg squats. So for a regular squat, it's on the toe, and then just watch them do some squats. And try to coach them to stay relatively center. It doesn't have to be perfect, but they can kind of see those guiding lines in the middle of the flag. You can just cue them to try to stay in between the two lines. Some simple things you can look for just on a regular two-footed squat are just going to be their general motor control. So if they can consistently track the laser up and down the flag, how deep they can track it. One thing you'll see is if they're getting their knee over their toes, that laser is not going to go out very far. While if they're sitting in the back seat, it's going to track all the way out and even across the entire room as they sit back. So that's a super valuable way of not giving people a lot of verbal cues, but just watching how they do it, and then say, hey, can you get that laser to move out further? And that should eventually teach them that to do that, they have to sit back a little deeper. And that's going to work their legs quite a bit more. So we're going to go through the next phase. This might be very easy for your client, and so we need to essentially just make it more challenging. The next thing would be to take a toe on the opposite leg and just put the toe down a couple feet behind the foot. And with this, you're going to see a little more internal rotation of the leg. So before they start, just make up for that by recentering the laser. And then let's go out to the first orange dot for this one. And so with their toe down, laser on the first orange dot, just doing a lunge. Just seeing if they can control that. So this is kind of a mid-level. They still have their other toe touching down, but it does make it a little bit more challenging. So this, you might start to see a little more variance in the tracking of the laser, but you can still give them the cue of, can you keep it within the general mid-lines of the flag? The next step beyond that is essentially just to take less and less weight off that back foot. If you're still questioning whether this person can do a single leg squat, maybe they're not ready for it, maybe their control is just not there, you could throw a cushion down and have their toe just lightly touching the cushion. So again, we've got the toe on the cushion, aiming the laser at about that orange first dot, and go through some more squats. What you can cue the client now to do is just to take more and more weight off that toe that's on the cushion. The less weight they have there, the more that loaded leg is going to work. If they can keep it in general within the middle of the flag, then you can move on to something like a single leg squat. One of my favorite things to assess with patients with any kind of lower extremity issue from the hip or the knee or even the ankle is their ability to do a lateral side step with good form. The cue for this, for what I give most people if they can do it, is just to be able to stand on a 3 or 4 inch or 5 inch step and slowly lower their heel down to the opposite side and come back up. We don't want them shifting weight over and coming back up. We want them to see if they can control that, so it's a single leg effort. Often I'll give them the cue of trying to act like they're dipping their heel in the water and then coming back up. And they can start with just an inch lowering to 2 inches lowering. That'll be plenty to get their quad fatigued with higher reps. So this is another great one to add visuals to, because it's going to give you live feedback to where their hip and knee is moving during the exercise. So for this one, as always, once they stand on one leg, then you calibrate the laser. For this one, because it's a single leg effort, we're going to move it out a little further to the first orange dot, and then have them slowly do their side step. If they have pain or difficulty with this one, we can just have them do 50%. So that's still going to be a ton of challenge and 100% weight bearing on one leg, but just going down a little bit. If they're only going down a really shallow amount and you want to get a little more feedback and trajectory out of the laser, let's aim it to the third dot. And that way when we're going down 50%, it's going to track out further. Right now I'm just having them take it to the red center dot and back to where we started. Again, compare this to the contralateral side or unaffected side and give them feedback to how resilient their rehab leg is versus their unaffected leg. So for a single leg squat, again, you're going to adjust the laser based on how they're standing before they start the exercise. Loaded foot at the center of the flag, stand on one leg, straighten the knee, and now we're going to aim that laser right at the orange dot. Again, the reason you aim it once they're standing on one leg is because when they stand on one leg, they're already going to be moving in a little bit of hip rotation. So you want to kind of account for that. And then aim for it, center the laser, and see if they can track that laser out. So let's take a look at that. Standing on one leg, slowly going into a single leg squat, then coming back up. Okay, so this is going to give you a lot of feedback for where their hip is moving, how their lower extremity is moving during a more challenging task. And it'll be a lot more fatiguing if they're using that external focus to try to achieve the goal of staying relatively centered. So you can just rep through reps to fatigue with that. And one of the really valuable things about this is then looking at their unaffected side and comparing it to their affected side, because this is going to give them motivation if they see that deficit on the side that they're trying to train. The final challenge is going to be adding an unstable surface to a single leg squat. So if all the other squat challenges using visual feedback are fairly easy, fairly controlled, then we can move on to using an unstable surface. So we always start the same way. First standing on one leg, then we dial in the laser. We're going to go a bit far out to the second dot, and then work on single leg squats down the center line. For further advancements on single leg, more dynamic proprioception, we're going to use the clock, which we can just kind of throw on the mat. I'm going to set it right here. And we're going to do some exercises involving single leg efforts in different planes of motion. So for this, it's going to be a rather small motion. They're really just trying to dial in different numbers. So I'm going to stand on one leg, and then we're going to turn on the laser, and let's aim it at the second dot for this. The further out you aim it, the less they're going to have to squat as they're trying to dial in these numbers. So because this one's pretty challenging, we don't want them in a full squat while they're trying to move around. I just want them to work on proprioception and little bits of shallow range of flexion. So we're going to stand on one leg, and then we can slowly go to different numbers. Some of this is ankle work, some of it's hip work. All of it involves proprioception. You can call out numbers for them to hit, or you can just have them go around the clock, whichever you prefer. You could also squat to a number, then come all the way back up and stop, and then go to another number. With a patient with proper control, we don't have to avoid valgus or varus. We don't have to always work with them in a single plane of motion. They're going to be challenging their knee with all sorts of live exercise things in their own sport. So you want to essentially see if they can tolerate different loads with control and increase speed, increase external challenge, and you can get creative as you want with that by throwing them a ball or calling out different numbers, adding distractions, things like that. The proprioception exercise with the clock is another great way you can show them on their affected side versus their unaffected side how they're doing. If those look even, then great. If they're drastically different, then that's going to give them something to work towards and also a motivating factor, something you can come back in 2 weeks and reassess how that control is. For switching from right to left leg, you just want to make sure you're setting up the same way each time. And all that really matters for that is you stand on one leg, you straighten the knee, and you aim the laser at whichever dot you want to start on. And again, for this one, I'm starting on the second dot because I'm not working in a lot of knee flexion.